Okay, simple summary for this week. I'm going to have to try to cover a lot of years in a short period of time, but let's see if we can do it. Okay, so the first half of American history, which is the entirety of 1301, goes hundreds of years. But the key elements are the American Revolution, the few years afterwards where people realized, oh, you know what? That wasn't enough. We're going to have to write a constitution. Implementing that constitution and establishing a federal government under the first president of the United States, George Washington. So I'm going to talk about that a little bit in complementary to the written lecture that you have. So the connective tissue is this. After we started 100 years ahead, this is kind of the prequel. This is the origin story. This is, I don't know, Batman Begins, I guess. So we talk about in the lecture the reasons for the revolution, but there's another element to it, and that's the personalities. It's a little bit dangerous to focus on personalities because then you get the impression that American history is really only presidents, or really only a handful of the presidents. And we're used to Mount Rushmore, for instance, which is Washington, Jefferson, Lincoln, and Theodore Roosevelt, all presidents, all hugely consequential. But American history is made up of, for instance, the revolution that you talk about in that lecture is hundreds of thousands of people. It's not just Washington, okay? But we focus on individuals sometimes too much, but I don't want to go too far in the other direction and focus not enough. So the story of the revolution in terms of people and in terms of the overall strategy, George Washington was not a professional soldier. He was a farmer. He was a plantation owner. He had some military experience, yes, but he was not a professional soldier. The American army, such as it was not a professional army. And so the goal of the revolution, and this is what I really want you to understand and articulate in your responses, wasn't really to defeat the British, because you couldn't do that. It was not possible to line up an American army and defeat the British Army, at least in a war. Maybe in an isolated battle here or there if you catch them like we did at Yorktown, that sort of thing. But straight up, the American army fighting the British Army in 1776 would be like, I don't know, a third grader fighting a college student. It's not a fair fight. So the goal wasn't, I'm going to defeat them, I'm going to break them, I'm going to kill their soldiers. No, I mean, you do some of that, of course. But the actual goal was wear them out so that they'll go home. It's the same strategy as was used against the United States in Vietnam. Just the enemy is stronger. Just keep fighting. Stay alive. Don't lose permanently. Don't get trapped into a decisive battle. Eventually they'll get sick of things and go home. So that's the piece of the revolution that I want to make sure you understand. It was a war of attrition to survive. And Washington being placed in command by the Congress, on purpose, by the way, because he was from Virginia. John Adams was the one who suggested it, said, maybe this guy should be commander-in-chief. Because when the war was starting, it was only being fought in Boston. And you don't want a war between Massachusetts and Great Britain. You want a war between America, right? And so Adams was like, pick the Virginian guy, this tall Virginian who's wearing his military uniform. Yeah, maybe he should be commander-in-chief, okay? So that's the broad strokes of the revolution and you'll see the details in the written lecture of the battles of French assistance and Saratoga and Yorktown and things like that. But the strategic part of it is, it wasn't a war that you're fighting to just completely defeat your enemy and break their will and kill all of them or anything like that. It was make them give up, make them get sick of this and go home. Okay, so that's the first piece of this. The second piece is the Constitution, which we take for granted. We talk about it in these almost religious terms, especially the First and Second Amendments, especially the Second Amendment here in Texas, But the Constitution, like the Revolution, like the creation of the United States as a whole, was not automatic. It was not always going to happen. Look at the dates. The United States declared its independence in 1776, right? We fought the Revolution for 7 years. In 1783, the war ends. Why isn't the Constitution 1783? Why is it 4 years later? Because they realized, the collective they, meaning the people in charge of the different United States, the different states that would make up the country, were like, you know what? Governing this thing is going to be harder than we thought, and we need more tools. You may or may not be familiar with something called the Articles of Confederation, but you could think of it as sort of the prototype for the Constitution. It's a beta mode. It's the early version, and it didn't work. It just wasn't strong enough. Congress couldn't raise any money because they couldn't tax under the Articles. So when there was an emergency, and there was a brief rebellion called Shays' Rebellion. Unpaid soldiers who hadn't been paid were like going to march with torches and everything else, and the United States government was not really prepared to deal with that. And so 4 years after the revolution ended, they met in Philadelphia. And even then, it wasn't guaranteed that they were going to write a brand new constitution. It just sort of worked out that way because the people who thought that we needed a new constitution were better organized and better prepared for that meeting than the people who were against it. And I'm talking primarily about James Madison, who is essentially the father of the Constitution. He wrote large sections of it. There were other people around. George Washington was present, but he just kind of sat there, kind of above the fray. Thomas Jefferson was off in France as ambassador. John Adams wasn't there. He was in Britain. This was James Madison's show. And they built this Constitution out of compromise. They couldn't get everything they wanted. But it established a permanent federal government. That's why we have a president and a Congress and a Supreme Court. It comes from the Constitution. And so the 1790s, after that was written and ratified, became a period where we're essentially experimenting. Can this work? Can a government like this work? A government not about kings, not about tyrants, not about a parliament that has too much power, but a government, as Lincoln said, of the people, by the people, and for the people. And again, don't think that it was automatic that it was going to work, because we think of the United States now in 2026 as this, gigantic superpower, and we are, right? But that's not what the United States was in 1794. It was a tiny country on the eastern seaboard, 13 colonies, a brand new government, probably too dependent on one person, a new form of government, a militarily weak country surrounded by colonial powers like Britain and France, and to a lesser extent Spain, hostile Native Americans along the border. Don't think that America was always guaranteed to become what it became. It was not guaranteed. So that's point number 2 to understand. One is the revolution is surviving, not thriving, and that the Constitution and the establishment of the government was not automatic. People had to work very hard to make America what it is. It didn't just happen. So those are the things that I want to emphasize. Coming up on 10 minutes here, I'm going to cut it short. Make sure you hit those 2 points in your responses.